Into the Lions' Den. Still reeling from their first home Test series defeat in 16 years, Ricky Ponting's Australian squad arrived in South Africa rated rank outsiders to win the series and retain their grip on the ICC Test mace. The challenge before the tourists seemed all the more daunting when it was confirmed they would enter the first Test at Johannesburg's infamous Bull Ring with their most inexperienced lineup in 20 years. In all, the Australians fielded 3 debutants at the Wanderers, taking to 5 the number of players to have received their first baggy greens in a month, and ensuring the side was all but unrecognisable to that which last crossed the Indian Ocean 3 years prior. When one of those rookies, Phillip Hughes, fell for a 4th ball duck to Dale Steyn in the first over of the series in South Africa, the pressure was well and truly on Australia. Relief, though, was close at hand. Ponting and his deputy, Michael Clarke, steadied the top order with fighting half-centuries, and Marcus North made a debut to remember with a stoic ton that muzzled the South African pace attack. By the time Brad Haddon and Mitchell Johnson had contributed innings of 63 and 96 not out respectively, the tourists found themselves in a position of strength at 466 all out in their first innings. But bowling would be their true test. Having failed to bowl teams out in 7 of their 14 tests in 2008, the task fell to the relatively inexperienced pace trio of Johnson, Peter Siddle and the debutant Ben Hilfenhaus to defend Australia's imposing total. They did not disappoint. Johnson signalled Australia's intent by dismissing the ever-dangerous Graham Smith in the first over of the innings, and Hilfenhaus followed with a wicket of Hashim Amla 3 balls later. Only AB de Villiers' innings of 104 saved the hosts from total calamity as Johnson and Siddle combined for 7 wickets to roll South Africa for a modest 220. The Australians, holding a hefty 246-run lead, never looked back. Hughes went far to making amends for his first innings failure with an entertaining, if not altogether orthodox 75 that helped his side to a total of 207 in the second innings and an overall lead of 453. And despite a few nervous moments against a more redoubtable South African top order in the second innings, Australia's paceman eventually finished off the job to seal a stunning 162-run victory. Johnson, with his unbeaten 96 and 8 wickets over 2 innings, was named man of the match. And so it was on to Kingsmead, with Australia holding a 1-0 lead and South Africa suddenly struggling for answers. The coin again fell the way of Ponting, and his opening combination of Hughes and Simon Kadich immediately vindicated his decision to bat first. The Australian duo carried their bats through the first session, en route to a massive first wicket stand. Kadich's patient innings of 108 continued his superb run of form since his recall to the Test side last year, but it was Hughes' 115 that made the headlines. Barely out of his teens, and with less than 2 years of first-class experience to his credit, Hughes had been in the crosshairs of Mickey Arthur prior to the Test over supposed flaws in his technique. How the South African coach must have wished for a retraction. Hughes' efforts largely papered over the cracks of a faltering performance from the Australian lower order to lead them to a highly respectable 352 on the first innings. As in Johannesburg, Australia's paceman did not wait long to press home the advantage established by their batsmen. In his most furious spell in international cricket, Johnson claimed the wickets of Neil McKenzie and Amla and sent Smith and Jacques Kallis to hospital within the space of 25 overs to send the South Africans to the canvas. This was the second time in the space of 3 tests that Johnson had broken Smith's hand, and the injury would rule the South African captain out of the remainder of the series. The hosts limped through to stumps on day 2, 7 wickets down, and Siddle required just 3 further deliveries the next morning to claim the final 2 wickets and bundle South Africa out for 138. Ponting promptly sought to turn the screw on his rivals by not enforcing the follow-on and allowing Hughes to again fill his boots. The left-hander rewarded his captain's faith by becoming the youngest batsman in Test history to post centuries in both innings of a Test match. His 160, complete with extravagant steps to leg and thunderous sixes, provided the impetus for Australia to declare their second innings closed at 331 for 5, and provided further evidence that Australia had found a long-term replacement for the recently retired Matthew Hayden. The South Africans were never in the hunt. Despite a strong 187-run third-wicket partnership between Jacques Kallis and AB de Villiers, the hosts never really looked like overhauling Australia's massive target. When the unlikely figure of Kadich wrapped up the tale with his occasional left-arm wrist spin, the South Africans were 175 runs short and Australia had sealed a memorable 2-0 series victory. There was much intrigue and more than a little bloodletting in the intervening 9-day period between the Durban and Cape Town tests. The South Africans, who had been perhaps the most settled side in international cricket for the preceding 18 months, wielded the axe and gave rise to murmurings that all was not well between Mike Proctor, the convener of selectors, and the coach Mickey Arthur. Neil McKenzie gave way for Imran Khan, and Morne Morkel stepped aside for his brother Albie, while Ashwell Prince was recalled to the captaincy, only to controversially turn it over to Jacques Kallis within 24 hours of the announcement. But if there was trouble within the South African ranks, it barely showed at Newlands. Dale Steyn and Paul Harris, who'd been dormant for large portions of the first 2 tests, sprung to life with a combined 7 wickets to dismiss the Australians for 209 in their first innings. The South Africans then ruthlessly drove home their advantage by compiling a monstrous total of 651, which included centuries to Prince, de Villiers and Jacques Callison. De Villiers, in particular, was in devastating form, at one stage smashing Andrew McDonald for 4 consecutive sixes and making a nightmare of Bryce McGain's debut. McGain, rated the best spinner in Australia, went wicketless and conceded a disastrous 149 runs from his 18 overs. It is difficult to see his international career progressing from here. The host surge towards victory was temporarily held up by Johnson, who smashed his maiden Test century from the number 8 position. But that served only to delay the inevitable. South Africa's win by an innings and 20 runs marked the first time in over 11 years that Australia had lost a Test by an innings, and gave notice that, while unsuccessful this time, the South Africans still fancy themselves contenders for the number 1 Test ranking. But they will have to wait. Australia's 2-1 series victory ensured the ICC Test mace remained safely in their keep, and provided Ponting with hope that his team's transition period was, finally, over. With Ranjit Shinde, Nishi Narayanan and Akila Ranganar, this is Alex Brown for Cricinfo.
This is Cricinfo Talk.